Good morning. How we doing today? This is James Sweeney, aka SplitSuit. Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to review a hand sent in by M. This is from 15 No Limit Online, and without further ado, let's check it out. Alright, so in this hand we have Ace King in the small blind. There's a min raise, there's a call, there's another call, and Hero decides to squeeze. Love the fact that we're 3-betting. I love the size of the 3-bet. Everything here looks really good so far. We end up getting one caller, two callers, find a fold, and go 3-way to it. Okay, nothing wrong with this so far. And we go to an Ace-Jack-8 board with a flush draw. So in this situation, before we even look at any of the actions, let's just pause for a moment and look at the SPR. So against Cartman, we have about 2.5 SPR. Against Nutcrusher, we have about 3 SPR. And again, I've talked about this a lot in the past, but whenever that SPR is 3 or less and I have top pair or better, as a pure default, I'm kind of in a, okay, comfortable taking it to the felt kind of mode. So in this situation, I think I'm pretty comfortable with it. Obviously, there are a couple of hands that beat us. There are pocket 8s, there's Ace Jack, there's maybe Ace 8 suited if anyone has that, and there's pocket jacks, but shy of that, we're not talking about a ton of combos, and there are certainly lots of second best combos that can and will continue. So that's kind of the first thought that I have whenever I get to a flop, especially in a 3-bet or a 4-bet pot. Always look at the SPR and ask yourself how close to commitment you really are. Now, just for the record, when M sent this hand in, there was no extra information attached. No HUD stats, no player information, no reads, no nothing. So we're going to talk about this from a very zoomed out conceptual point of view. Now, in this situation, Hero did decide to c-bet, and c-bets for half pot. And one of the major questions I asked myself, again, we're just zooming out and talking about this conceptually, is if Hero had like, say 8-6 of hearts or king queen or total nonsense, would Hero ever c-bet for half pot out of position in this situation? And I don't think so. So I don't think 10 makes a lot of sense, because if you're going to bet 10 with your ace king but 15 or 16 with your bluffs, you start to have some sort of sizing discrepancy which your opponents are eventually going to figure out. So be careful about doing that, particularly with your c-bets. So in this situation, I think if you're going to c-bet, choose something a little bit larger, like 15. Choose a size that you would actually use with your bluffs as well. The other thing I will say is I think there's a lot of value in considering a check raise here, simply because I think if you do check raise, people aren't going to assume you're going to do it with something like ace king, and as such you can rep a lot of semi-bluff kind of hands but actually end up showing with the top side of your range and get your opponents to maybe say, wait, that doesn't make sense, and then they give you action a little bit wider. Just something you want to consider. Always at least ask yourself if you can check raise with hands like this. I know for most people it's just default c-bet, don't think twice about it, but when you're looking at hands off table, take the time to say, wait, what are some other lines I have available? How are my opponents going to react accordingly? And is that line better than the default one that I would normally take? So just a little food for thought there. In this exact situation, Nutcrusher does call us. We go to the turn. Turn does fill up the flush draw. And Hero goes for a check, faces a bet, and then Hero just decides to call. So let's take a moment and do a little bit of hand reading here. Of course, we should have been doing that the entire time along, but let's at least focus on it right this moment. So one of the big questions I asked myself is it likely that Nutcrusher has a huge hand, right? I don't think pocket aces make a lot of sense. 1, because there's not a lot of combos of it, and 2, because he didn't 3-bet preflop. Okay, if they had pocket jacks or pocket 8s, obviously huge hands, but are they likely to slow play that on the flop when there's so many draws present? Or can we diminish some of those combos thinking that they're going to aggress most of the time on the flop, but not always? So again, when they just call the flop, is that indicative that we're looking more at things like single pairs, be it ace X or jack X, maybe draws like 9-10? Do we have to panic that much here? And then the other thing is, do we have to panic about the flush draws? Well, obviously the flush draw did improve, but how many combos is Nutcrusher really going to have of made flushes? The big question you ask yourself is, how would they play monster flush draws on the flop? King queen of clubs, 9-10 of clubs, 8-9 of clubs, where it's the pair and flush draw. A lot of players are going to play that very aggressively, and as such you may actually be able to diminish a lot of those combos when they just call on the flop. So now we're in a situation here where we don't have to be as nervous about the 4. In fact, the 4 filling up the flush draw just gives backdoor flush draws hope, right? Maybe with ace queen with the queen of clubs or king jack with the king of clubs. It gives extra hope to those, but it doesn't necessarily make a bunch of made flushes right this moment. That's definitely something that you need to be considering. And that's both before you check in the first place and start going into a check call or a check raise mode. And again, this is another great situation just to pause and say, wait, would a check raise make more sense? Right? Because again, do you rep a lot of strong stuff? Does it look like you're semi-bluffing more often than not? Or do you need check call? Or again, could you just have double barreled in the first place? Because you kind of got to keep in mind that ace-king here is pretty much one of the strongest hands in your range. So how are you going to play the strongest hands in your range? Definitely something that you need to be asking yourself, and even more so when you're playing against thinking opponents. And as you're playing higher and higher, especially online, you're going to find that the average default person in your player pool is thinking at a higher level, so you need to be thinking about what you represent all along the way. Not the same thought process I would suggest for something like 5 no limit or 10 no limit, but as you start getting into 100, 200, 400 no limit online, these are definitely the questions you want to be keeping in the back of your head. So all of that to say, I don't particularly care for the check call, right? This is one where I prefer more to check raise. I'm not super concerned about being behind. If I am going to check, I'm definitely looking more for the check shove rather than allow him to set the price, improve on his backdoor flush draws for cheap, and put myself in some situations where rivers can be a little awkward and uncomfortable, whereas I could have made more profit just by check shoving the turn and making him make a difficult decision. So that's just my overall thought process. Again, I'm not even saying that checking is going to be my default on the turn, but if I do, that's the way that I would form the conversation in my head. That all being said, hero does decide to just check call on the turn, and this is what I really want to talk about. River pairs the board with the 8, hero checks, faces a bet, and hero folds. Okay, so let's talk about this for a quick moment. One of the things you want to be asking yourself always, especially when you're thinking and talking about playing against better opponents, is what do you represent? What do you realistically have a large chunk of the time when you take this line? And the thing is if you were to cover up your whole cards right now and think about all the hands that hero would realistically have when they 3-bet preflop, c-bet the flop for half pot, and then check call the turn, that looks a lot like scared kings, scared queens, scared jack X, maybe scared ace X, but ultimately it doesn't look like a ton of strength, right? When that's the case, and then you look at your hand and say, wait, I actually have ace-king in this spot, so I actually have like one of the absolute strongest hands that I could possibly have in my range right this moment. Think about it. If you're going to fold the absolute strongest hand realistically that's in your range right this moment, you're probably folding far, far, far too often. It's just simply the nature of the beast. And when that's the case, you make yourself wide open and exploitable to bluffs. The issue here is that you're getting 2.7 to 1 on a call. I don't think there's any way that you can say you're behind often enough. And 2, based upon the fact that you did take such a passive line, again with a smaller bet on the flop, with just the check call on the turn, another check on the river, you rep very, very weak, and I think you open yourself up to your opponent either thinking that they're value betting with hands that you beat, or thinking that they can bluff you off of things like pocket kings, pocket queens. So ultimately, I think by folding here, you're leaving a ton of money on the table. You took a line that induced bluffs, and when you take a line that induces bluffs, and you're putting yourself in a bluff catch mode, you actually have to do the bluff catch thing. If you don't, then you're folding far too often and you make yourself a massive target to people just bluffing you with impunity. Because if you're folding the absolute strongest hand in your range, well, again, it's not too difficult to punish someone like that. And this is the stuff you want to be looking for and taking advantage of in your opponents, but not letting them take advantage of you that same exact way. So M, hopefully this helps the next time you find yourself in a similar situation. Thank you so much for sending this hand in. And I know this was a lot of food for thought, again, especially about the bet size on the flop, thinking about your value to bluff hands and which size you would choose with each. I typically don't suggest much bet size forking on the flop specifically. And then also thinking about check raising as an option, making sure that if you are going to go for check calls with your really top side of your range, thinking about are you over folding them anywhere along the line, especially on rivers where those mistakes can really, really cost you. So again, this was a lot of stuff, a lot of food for thought, but ultimately this all boils down to some hand reading and a lot of frequency focus and making sure that your betting frequencies are correct, making sure that your ratios in your betting is correct, making sure that you're not overfolding in situations and that you're looking for opponents who are overfolding in a lot of situations. And this is all stuff I covered in my brand new course called The 1%. This is a companion video series to the popular book Poker's 1%. sent by Ed Miller and something that I definitely suggest you check up on if you're interested in learning more about this stuff. Honestly, frequencies are everything in poker, even though a lot of people don't realize it, but when you do and you know how to shape your frequencies in terms of your value to bluff combos, you can do a lot of fun stuff and this game becomes much, much easier. So again, check it out. There's a link in the description box and also a link on the screen. If you have any comments or questions about this hand or the video series, feel free to let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you guys back soon with a brand new video, and in the meantime, good luck out there and happy grinding.